What's the trashiest wedding you've been to? Surely that video of the bride walking down the backyard aisle while dirty dancing to her own crappy recorded cover of Crazy BTCH has got to be up around here somewhere. Link to that gem in the description below. I was actually the bartender, but it was a hoot. First, wedding was outside and it stormed violently. Groom was hammered pre-wedding. Hit on all the bartenders. Then the DJ got hammered, made lewd comments to women in the microphone. Then basically everyone was hammered, knocked over the wedding cake, which also happened to be a table with many candles, so the place caught on fire. Good times. Often wonder how that marriage worked out. The bride made a speech thanking her in-laws for financial assistance for the event. Her mother was not thanked and she was furious. There was a long head table for bridal party and parents. It was made out of small tables pushed together covered by one long tablecloth. The mother pulled a small table out of the arrangement, catching the tablecloth, and nearly destroying the head table set up. Now the bride got angry and there was much back and forth with various family members attempting to make peace. The mother refused to push back her table and began to invite others to sit with her, all people who were not meant to be seated at the front. Mother of bride continued to sit there and talk crap about her daughter, the bride, to anyone who would listen. Wedding was in a suburban driveway. The maid of honor stole the bouquet from someone's garden and the best man proudly announced he had shoplifted the rings. The groom wore a button-down shirt that said F off in fancy lettering. The bride stopped in the middle of the vows to tell her mother to get that fluffing kid out of here. It was her second kid by the previous bloke. When it was over, we apologized to the celebrant. He said he'd seen worse. The best man screwed the groom's mother between the meal and the dancing. The groom finds out and punches the best man, breaking his hand. The best man drives away and gets stopped by the police for drunk driving. Being a wedding photographer is awesome. I worked at a wedding venue where a similar thing happened. The groom and best man went missing between the ceremony and reception. The bride tracked them down to the disabled toilets where the groom was bent over the basin. She smashed her wine glass in his face, and obviously that marriage was over before the reception even began. I was at one a few years ago where an American gal was marrying her French fiancé. The guy's mom gave a toast, in French of course, which detailed how disappointed she was and how this event marked her losing her son forever. The bride wasn't quite fluent enough to pick up every detail, but she got the gist just fine. Later French mom told her son he was getting too fat and slapped the beer out of his hand, where it splattered all over both of them, and she ran off crying and locked herself in her hotel room. The maid of honor took it upon herself to spend the rest of the evening trying to console French mom and get her to come back to the reception, which she never did. When we saw her at breakfast the next morning, French mom was flitting about, seemingly happy and like nothing had happened the night before. A wedding on the beach behind Hooters. The officiant stood next to a trash bin. As if it was planned, the trash collector pulled up during the vows. Did he wait to change the bag? Absolutely not. Children at the wedding swarmed the couple like the flies around the trash can just after the kiss, stepping all over her dress. She bent over to adjust her sandal and a pack of Marlboro Reds fell out of the bust along with her right breast. It felt like we were rubbernecking instead, witnessing a marriage. Hoo boy, this is my time to shine. So my uncle was a preacher but also owned a restaurant. A 16-year-old got married to her 17-year-old boyfriend in the back room. Her name was Candy. After the ceremony she opened her wedding gifts like it was her birthday. One of the waitresses, Brenda, had given her her old lingerie as a gift. I remember during the reception, Candy went out back to throw the lingerie into a dumpster while Brenda sang "These Boots Were Made for Walking" on karaoke. For their honeymoon, her mom bought them a room at the Holiday Inn around the corner, but they got bored so they came home. Ceremony was in a park, not booked or decorated, just showed up and found a spot. Reception was at a scout hall. No decorations again, and for catering the bride's family went through Red Rooster drive-thru and got a bunch of whole chickens and chips. 5 different cars went through one after the other and ordered, they didn't even pre-order. Groom and all his friends were high as kites and only reason bride wasn't is because she announced she was knocked up. Groom and his mates bought their dirt bikes and after eating went out and rode them around the hall. Was so loud and muddy. A friend's wedding. She was walking down the aisle and had to pause to put out her cigarette. It was a small wedding and her friends thought it was hilarious. Married less than 2 years. She married him because he was in the military and she thought she was getting cash for life. He chose deployment to a war zone over staying with her. I don't even know where to begin. Ceremony was comprised of immediate family, then followed by a reception with all guests in a relatively nice hotel banquet hall. An hour in at 7 p.m. the open bar was completely closed down because multiple guests were throwing up in the bathroom sinks causing flooding. The groom was so wasted even before the ceremony but was blackout by the time of reception. During the first dance he kept his hands in his cargo pant khakis the entire time and ate dinner sitting on the floor in a corner of the hall while the bride sat at the head table alone. About 2 hours in, the groom randomly left and slept at their house while the bride stayed in the newlywed suite by herself. They are now separated, as you may have assumed by this point. I went to a wedding in a funeral home once. Drove by it 3 times before realizing that it was in fact the correct address for the venue. Reception and ceremony were there. Completely dry wedding too. There were no tables and chairs. Like none. They had an open bar but no chairs. Everyone had to put their drink on the ground and hold their plate to eat. It was freaking crazy. Everyone just assumed that some sort of terrible thing happened where the tables and chair people didn't bring them, but afterwards I asked her, the bride, what happened, and she just said, oh, we would have had to pay extra for that. My friend group and I talk about this wedding to this day, and probably will for the rest of our lives. The bride and groom decided to do things on a very, very small budget. That's fine. Frugal weddings and budget weddings can be beautiful and nice. There is a difference between a frugal wedding and a cheap wedding, however, and this was cheap. For instance, the wedding was in July. They decided to hold it in a non-air-conditioned park shelter. The decorations were actual trash. The bride decided me and the other bridesmaids needed tiny top hats, which she made from discarded styrofoam cups. Mine had ants in it. She asked me to be the maid of honor. I was flattered but confused. She'd had 3 maids of honor before me, and they all quit for various reasons, mostly baby daddy drama related. She wanted live music but wouldn't pay a pianist. My friend Steven's sister said she'd play the wedding march on a keyboard for $50. Said sister couldn't actually play the piano, but she did the pre-recorded wedding march song. Nobody could tell the difference because the woman in charge of baking the cake got shit-faced the day before and was baking the cake in the non-air-conditioned park shelter's little kitchen while listening to the radio. Very loudly. The bride and groom tried to write their own vows, got in a fight over it, and didn't tell the officiant until the day of that there were no vows. Fortunately, he was on it and had backup vows ready to go. The bride hadn't tried on her dress, which she'd bought from AliExpress, until the day of. It was way too small and we had to rip out the back and safety pin in some satiny white fabric. Which would have been great, if the dress hadn't been off-white. The groom made comments and it turned out that the whole dress thing was based on his mom offering to pay for the dress, then rescinding because she had to bail out his brother. My friend, instead of going to an actual store and buying a dress, picked one off of AliExpress. Would have been less weird if I hadn't been dress shopping with her like 3 times because her mom couldn't/wouldn't pick out a mother of the bride dress. The groom's entire family, including his best man and his 2 groomsmen, left right after the meal. Spaghetti, green beans, and McDonald's orange drink was served. The DJ, my friend Steven and his Bose speakers, didn't know this and tried to announce the groom's dance with his mom. His mom had left. Apparently his family was furious that it was a dry venue. The only member of the family left was the ring bearer, who it turns out was forgotten. We had to take him home because his family wouldn't come get him. The groom slept through the rehearsal and showed up to the wedding drunk. We had to put another friend on bouncer duty because 2 of the bride's aunts tried to walk away with the cash envelope. We gave him the envelope because he was the tallest and we figured he could outrun the aunts. The bride's brother was originally on envelope duty but we caught him taking a 50 out of the envelope, so we had to take it from him. We had to politely inform the best man he couldn't smoke in the porta-john. We had porta-johns instead of actual working bathrooms. The worst, though, was the photographer. As maid of honor, I was informed day of that I had to keep the photographer 100 feet away from the ring bearer and flower girls at all times. He was a registered offender, but also the bride's uncle, and he volunteered to do the pictures for free, so he ended up using a telephoto lens. Because he couldn't get close enough to the wedding party to take the pictures. They divorced a couple months later after the house they were staying in burned to the ground. I have no idea to this day why they even got married. Both of my middle sister's weddings. Don't get me wrong, she's the sane one of my sisters and I actually really love her, but she has a, shall we say, unique sense of style. Wedding number 1 was while she was working as a carny, and was held after closing time on the midway at some Podunk County fair. I may well have been the only sober person there, and there were definitely more tattoos than teeth in attendance. She wound up leaving him when he turned out to be an abusive, self-centered twat who contributed nothing to taking care of their kid. Wedding number 2, just last year, was mostly okay, and brother-in-law is a really stand-up guy. But y'all, the whole wedding theme was camo. My sister wore a camouflage wedding dress and matching Crocs. Brothers-in-law wore jeans and a dress shirt with a camo vest. The frigging cake was covered in camo-patterned ribbons, and I don't know where the hell she got camo-patterned silk roses, but the cake had a pile of those too. A friend of the family is a wedding photographer. We went to dinner with her family a few weeks ago and she explained the most bizarre wedding she had ever been to, which happened to be that same day, and involved someone we all know. Wedding was behind a trailer in a trailer park. Folding chairs clearly labeled property of, insert school name here, there were 2 church pews, and several 5-gallon buckets turned upside down. Some of the wedding party arrived on riding mowers. The bride was wearing some screen-printed t-shirt, jeans, and a veil made from cheesecloth. The groom was wearing a jean vest with no shirt underneath and torn jeans. The bride had met the groom just over 3 months prior, as the groom was still married to his first wife at the time. Divorce takes 90 days here. Do the math. Most of the guests were dressed like they were in the middle of doing yard work. Reception was in the same area. Several cases of PBR and Miller Lite, supermarket pre-boxed cheese and cracker spreads, and a few Bojangles fried chicken boxes. I was staying at a really massive hotel about a decade ago, and a group of what I can only describe as rough-looking hippies were having a wedding reception in the ballroom. I was sitting at the bar ready to order when one of the groomsmen invited me to eat and drink. They apparently had too much food and alcohol. Of course, I obliged. Free alcohol and food? Why not? When I walked in the ballroom, all I could smell was body odor mixed with a hint of food. It was so damn hot in that room. Some of them weren't wearing shirts, male and female alike, and almost none of them had on shoes. Only a handful of people were dressed somewhat casually. It was just humid, sweaty and warm in there. When I say rough-looking hippies, just picture that stereotype in your head, and I shit you not, that's how most of them looked. Instead of a DJ, they had a dude on the stage with drums, bongos, a guitar, a rain stick, and I'm pretty sure a didgeridoo. I didn't want to be rude, so all I grabbed was grilled asparagus, and then I left as soon as the guy walked out of sight. It was so disgusting in there. The next morning I noticed they had cordoned off the ballroom area, and they had a good portion of their housekeeping staff stacking trash bags into those rolling garbage bins. I felt so bad for them. Camo print wedding dress that was borderline see-through. Walked down the aisle to the Scooby-Doo theme. No, nobody knows why they chose that song, including the couple themselves. They divorced a few months later after they both stopped cleaning the house in an act of defiance against one another. A 2 friends from college wedding was just awkward. Bride sewed her own dress, which was a size too big. She's really slim and tiny, so she looked like she had a very conservative satin nightgown on that was a rush job. Their first kiss was at the altar. When they finished, the pastor said, "Oh, come on, you can do better than that." During part of the ceremony there was parents' blessing. Groom's family was quick and private, really sweet. Bride's parents were loud and they bawled while talking for 15 minutes each. Reception was potluck and not enough food for those attending. Wedding colors were baby blue and lavender. A mutual friend was DJ, and the mother of the bride passed him a note to read aloud to the guests. Poor guy then had to go, "Groom, your mother-in-law says you can pet the kitties now." They previous spring break meal had gotten bride a baggy, standard size t-shirt with kittens on it. Kittens just so happened to be about bust height. I offered to do flowers, boutonnieres, corsages, centerpieces, but the wedding party didn't store them as I had suggested, so the next day they were wilted and really sad. Did I mention this was a dry wedding? Ooh, I've got one. Okay, so the bride was my older cousin. We were all from the Midwest, but she's been living with her family in a small town in the SE. Approximately 20 to 30 family members flew/drive in from out of state, halfway across the country. This was going to be her first marriage, to a man that was not the father of any of her 4 children, each from different fathers. This was the middle of summer, in the American Southeast, so hot and muggy. To skip forward a bit, there was no air conditioning at the family home, the motel, the church, or the reception hall. So everyone was sweating in their nice clothes the whole time. I'll start by our motel. Some of the parents were going to have their own rooms, and the kids and 2 older kids were going to be in their own room. The first thing that happens is that the kids get locked in the room. A previous tenant had bashed in the doorknob, so they couldn't open the door once it closed behind them. We tried picking up the phone to call the front desk, but the phone's cord and jack had been ripped out of the wall. Some of the younger kids were freaking out because of all of the palmetto bugs flying around the room. Motel staff ended up breaking the window because the window was painted shut, and then never offered to move the children into another room until we asked for it. When we got together at the bride's parents' home, the bride's dad, my uncle, and amusingly my godfather, never got up from his recliner, even though we hadn't seen him in more than 10 years, where he was watching VHS tapes of late 80s WrestleMania. He had an apple box next to the sofa heaping full with empty Miller High Life cans. First, we found out that 2 of the groomsmen couldn't attend the wedding, because they were arrested for cocaine distribution. So, one of my older cousins was recruited to replace one of them because he was about the same size, so he could fit in the rented suit. We then found out that 2 of the bridesmaids couldn't attend the wedding, because they couldn't get the day of work from the Kmart. So since we were already down 1 groomsman, we only needed 1 replacement bridesmaid. The trouble was, nobody would fit the rented dress. So one of my cousins was recruited to stand with the bridesmaids, with the dress draper over her shoulder. We get to the actual ceremony, and it turned out nobody bought a unity candle to light during the ceremony. So the minister sent his wife to Kmart to pick up a $1 plain white candle. The ceremony started before she got back, and paused for a very long feeling 10-ish minutes until she came back with the candle. The bride's flow bouquet was a very fake-looking potted sunflower. After the ceremony, we went to the reception. There were not going to be any beverages provided, until the bride's mom, my aunt, my dad's sister, this will be important later, used their refrigerator rent money, they didn't own their fridge, to buy a couple of cases of Sprite. At the reception, they asked me to be the DJ. They knew I worked at a record store, so they thought I'd be a good DJ, apparently. The groom, last minute, decided he really wanted a limo for the wedding, so they canceled the DJ they had, and rented a limo, more on this later. To take the DJ's place, they put a boombox up on a table in the corner of the hall, and gave me their CDs. My heart sank when I looked through their CDs, all country, or rap. So I started playing music from the artists I knew, and everything skipped. The CDs were stacked without cases, and people just slid them back and forth across each other when looking through them. Apparently, they also had a party the night before where they got thrown around. Bottom line is, the only 2 CDs that didn't skip were a LeAnn Rimes CD, and the Dr. Dolittle soundtrack. So, I just switched between those 2 albums. Then the limo arrived, a 70s-looking Cadillac. Smoking. After a few minutes of trying to figure out what was going on, they opened the hood, and there was a fire under the hood. At this point, people are pretty hungry. The bride comes over to thank my parents for the gift, and that food was on the way, and said something like, and there was enough money left over that I could get these beautiful acrylic nails. As the wedding gift, my parents gave them $150 to use for food, since there wouldn't have been food otherwise. The food arrives. It's 1 9x13 aluminum pan of baked beans, and 1 9x13 of, fully cooked, but, still partly frozen chicken wings from her friend's catering company. The groom's family rushes the food, and took it all. There was 0 food left for anyone from the side of the family that traveled 1,000 miles, and actually paid for the food. After about 3 hours of country and rap, my aunts and uncles that have traveled in and are all of German heritage wanted to dance to one polka. So one of my aunts went to their car and they had actually brought along a tape with the song on it. After getting the go-ahead from the bride, the song is started, and within seconds, the groom's entire side goes, "Oh, hell no," and leaves. Every single person. So, now it's just the wedding party and the bride's side of the family left at the reception hall. They had to leave the hall clean, so we all started to pitch in and clean. Meanwhile, everyone notices the bride's dad sitting alone at the bar, drinking his own booze. My dad has always resented him for marrying his sister, and then moving the family so far away to live near the military base he was discharged from, and then basically giving up on life, becoming an alcoholic, and let the family live a really low-income life feeding off his disability. Seeing him just sit while the rest of the family cleaned upset my dad, so he walked over to ask him to help the family clean. Nobody heard what they said to each other, until we heard a crash of a bar stool hitting the floor. We looked over, and my dad's holding him up off the ground by the back of his suit jacket, like holding a puppy by the scruff of its neck. My dad was a bigger guy, worked in a factory for 30 years, an EMT and fireman, grew up a farmer, played high school football, etc., but was a teddy bear in terms of temperament. My uncle/godfather was maybe 120 pounds wet. My dad put him down, pushed the broom up to his chest until he grabbed it, and walked away. My uncle started sweeping, to everyone's shock, having never seen him work a day in his life. After we cleared out and locked up the reception hall, my family went to a KFC for dinner since we hadn't had anything to eat all day, even after technically paying for lunch. We originally tried Denny's, but there was a sign on the door that they were closed so that the staff could have dinner. When we got back to the motel, there was a message waiting for my dad, asking if he'd after butchered a snake. One of my aunts/uncles/cousins who traveled and brought their little dog. During the ceremony, it was left behind at the bride's parents' house, but somehow managed to open the rear sliding door and went outside. The back of the property had a narrow waterway running behind it. A large snake had killed, and was trying to swallow, the small dog. Someone killed the snake by bashing its head, and they called my dad, the avid hunter, and former farmer who did have to slaughter the occasional animal, to try to get the dog out of the snake so it could be buried. He said no. The next day, was gift opening at the bride's parents' home. As they started opening gifts, many of them personalized, they noticed a pattern. Their last name was misspelled on almost every item. It turns out that the friend who offered to print their wedding invitations, with their color dot matrix printer, as their gift, spelled the groom's last name wrong, and they didn't want to upset the friend, and ask her to reprint. So everyone who used the invitation as the guide for how to spell the personalized gift, had it spelled wrong. In the end, the groom also got arrested and sent to prison for his connection to the same incidents that lead to the two groomsmen's cocaine distribution issues, and the marriage was annulled, but the bride kept his last name. TLDR, lots of baby daddies, sketchy motel, VHS tapes of WrestleMania, a huge box of empty beer cans next to the recliner, can't get time off from Kmart, cocaine arrests, wearing a dress over their arm because it didn't fit, ceremony delay due to Kmart trip, refreshments paid for with refrigerator rent money, Dr. Dolittle, old limo catches fire, not enough baked beans and frozen chicken wings, entire half of the family leaves because they don't like one song, nearly a fight from brewing decades-long animosity, Denny's closed for dinner, snake eats a family pet, misspelling on nearly every gift, and finally more cocaine arrests and marriage annulment. As always, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, show your support. Leave your thoughts and opinions down below.